Hello, I'm Lukwesa Burak and welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories today. A betrayal of the new Zimbabwe. President Mnangagwa condemns police violence as he arrives back home to a country in crisis.
Hard decisions are only made by a government that's committed to the future. A government that's not committed to the future will focus on the populism of today, will focus on being popular today, but doesn't focus on the next generation.
1 week on, Kenya remains in a heightened state of alert as people return to the scene of the tragedy that rocked the nation, and a memorial service is held paying tribute to some of the victims. Also in the programme, shedding light on the threat of extremes. We have a special report looking at how Mali's cycle of drought, floods and poverty is threatening a traditional way of life.
The conflict and the climate. Everything is a problem here. Mali has all the problems. And some families don't even have anything to eat.
And in sport, could former Ghana international Kevin Prince Boateng be welcomed back by football fans to the Black Stars? We travel to Accra to find out. Hello there, thank you for joining us here on Focus on Africa, coming to you from BBC World News. Well, first this evening, Zimbabwe's President Mnangagwa has arrived back in the country after breaking short a foreign tour. He's been quick to condemn what he called the wanton violence which has been taking place on the streets of the capital Harare and other cities like Bulawayo over the past few weeks. It was all sparked by a sharp rise in fuel prices. He said chaos and insubordination would not be tolerated. But surprisingly, the president appeared to reserve his harshest criticism for the army and police. Our correspondent in Harare, Andrew Harding, is following events for us.
Here in the centre of Harare, it does feel like a city trying to get back to normal. Buses are operating, businesses open, shops as well, and by and large, the police, although they're here in large numbers, security around the city tight, but it's not as visible as it was, of course, last week. And the message we're getting very much from the government, from President Emerson Mnangagwa, who came back here overnight from his foreign trip, is that this is a country trying to put the last 10 days of violence behind it. He said, the President said, we have to reach out to the opposition for a national dialogue. He was very critical of violent protesters who he put the blame on for the trouble last week, but he was also critical of his own security forces, saying that if it was proved that they had exceeded their mandate, if you like, their heads would roll. Now, I've been talking about this to Mnangagwa, who's permanent secretary in the information ministry here, and he had this to say.
Hard decisions are only made by a government that's committed to the future. A government that's not committed to the future will focus on the populism of today, will focus on being popular today, but doesn't focus on the next generation. This government is focused on the next generation. It's prepared to make hard decisions so that your children may have a good future.
Zimbabwe's government insists it is on the right track, that it has nothing to apologize. But for many ordinary Zimbabweans here in Harare, it doesn't feel like that. And a short while ago, we had an extraordinary experience. We were presented with a young man who had been badly beaten by soldiers. He worked in one of these minibus taxi parks, and he said he and 30 other young men had been taken by soldiers out to the edge of town. They'd been rounded up, forced to lie on the ground, and then savagely beaten for about 2 hours. When we stumbled on him, he was in enormous pain, his legs badly beaten and scarred. We took him to a clinic on the other side of town, and they're looking after him now. But as we were talking to him in the car, he kept saying over and over again, this is our government, it's supposed to be our government. Why are they terrorizing us?
That was Andrew Harding there with the latest from the streets of Harare. Well, let's get more now on the economic situation in Zimbabwe. Debbie Peters, is a finance specialist based in Harare and joins me live. Thank you for speaking to us here at Focus on Africa. So first off, we're talking here about, or rather we heard Mr. Mnangagwa talk about tough, unpopular measures to fix the country. President Ramaphosa of South Africa is talking about dropping those international sanctions. How much will that hurt, or rather help, Zimbabwe's economy?
Obviously, the removal of sanctions is going to help Zimbabwe a lot, especially Zidera, the US sanctions, which are affecting us accessing credit. Zimbabwe owes a lot of money, and each of those debts affects other debts. Once we get money flowing into Zimbabwe, the economy will be back on track.
Okay, these protests began with fuel prices. Your speciality is as a consultant for energy companies. How difficult is it at the moment for people who are trying to buy fuel just to get to work or take their children to school?
I think the fuel price has gone up, but the supply has not increased. So people are spending the whole day outside empty petrol stations, hoping that they will open and they'll receive fuel, even if there's no fuel. It's just pure luck. I was lucky on Saturday. I was driving by. I managed to get a full tank of diesel. But that's not the same for everybody. People spend 24 hours in a day looking for fuel. And it affects everything. The cost of
just very quickly, Debbie.
The cost of everything.
Okay, well, just very quickly, we're talking about the cost of everything. Where is everybody keeping their money? How difficult or easy is it to bank?
Well, 90% of Zimbabweans are unemployed, so they live hand to mouth. They have to work every day. The country was closed for the whole week, so by Tuesday, Wednesday, people were hardly surviving. They buy bread every day to eat for that day, so we're severely impacted. The bigger companies, they couldn't transact. All payments are online, so I think the economy must have lost over $1 billion in transactions. Losing a whole week, that's a quarter of the month's revenue, which went up in smoke. Even the people who made it to work were just sitting around.
And finally, Debbie, I've been looking within your Twitter sphere, and there seems to be a lot of people who are talking about the question of whether to stay or leave the country. Is there a real concern that there is going to be an exodus from Zimbabwe? Its richest source is going to lose its people.
Yes, there's always been waves of people leaving. I left, I came back 5 years ago hoping to make a difference. But once again, if I can't get by in 5 years, most professionals don't have a job. We are all consulting, freelancing, and currently I think the cost of everything has gone up like 100% in the past month alone. Food has gone up. People are not earning any more, so they are struggling to get by. And if you have a good career behind you, a good resume, you can go somewhere else and make a living. Zimbabweans are very popular workers.
Okay, Debbie Peters, finance specialist in Harare. Thank you for speaking to us tonight. You're watching Focus on Africa. Let's take a quick look at the other stories making the headlines now across the continent. Sudanese police have fired tear gas at crowds of demonstrators in the capital's twin city, Omdurman, protesting against the fatal wounding of a demonstrator last week. It's been more than a month now since the escalating protests against the 3-decade rule of President Omar al-Bashir. They were triggered by the government's tripling of the price of bread. Now, Uganda say 190 people have been arrested for carrying out female genital mutilation, which is illegal in the country. It happened in an overnight raid following concerns about an increase in the number of women being cut, as it's referred to, in the Sabay region in the east of the country. Now, police say statements have been taken from suspects and they're trying to trace the intended victims before going ahead with pressing charges.
Sometimes these people have intelligence, they know we are coming, and you will only find, probably if you're lucky enough, you'll find that they've left the girl bleeding behind. And so you will start a hunt for the people who have done it. Or probably they will carry away the girl and you'll find the parts that have been cut off. And so it's that unfortunate.
And police in Ghana say they're following numerous significant leads, as they're calling them, as they investigate the murder last week of a journalist who exposed widespread corruption in football. They have interviewed an MP, Kennedy Agyapong, and the former head of the Ghanaian Football Association, Kwesi Nyantakyi. Ahmed Hussein Swallow was part of a special investigations team whose work exposed corruption in Ghanaian football. Now, Kenya remains on high alert after last week's attack on a hotel and office complex in the capital, Nairobi. 21 people were killed when Islamist al-Shabaab militants stormed the compound. Well, today, survivors, still coming to terms with the attack, were allowed to return to the scene to collect their belongings that they had to abandon. Hundreds of people today also attended a memorial service to pay tribute to 6 men who were all employed by the same technology firm. Our correspondent, Ferdinand Omondi, has the latest.
A week after the unfortunate events here at the Dusit complex, it is now open to the people who worked here. Many of them who were here survived the incident, and now they've been allowed to come in and take their vehicles. But we understand police are conducting some serious verification at the barriers over there. You have to get in with your logbook and also prove your identity, after which you're escorted to the vehicle and it is searched before they are allowed to leave. We've seen other people also ferrying some of their work tools from the offices. A lot of them still looked traumatized, understandably so, but we're able to speak to some of them who shared with us what's going through their minds at the moment.
Right now, you're going through a number of counseling sessions, and I know by the time we'll be back to work, we'll be mentally prepared for just to resume to normal business. Yeah.
We are actually coming to terms, so we already have people who are helping us come into terms with what happened, yes.
Would you come back and work here again?
Yes, I would.
On the same day, there's been a memorial service today, which was also out of bounds members to the media. 6 members of one company who died in last week's event, and a memorial service has been conducted to them. Another one for all the 21, which will be more of a nationwide service, will be conducted tomorrow. Police are still searching for those who organized or were accomplices in this exercise, and they are confident that they will catch up to them. And many Kenyans indeed will be hoping that those who were responsible for these acts will be held to account. Ferdinand Omondi, BBC News, Nairobi.
Well, do stay with us here on Focus on Africa. Of course, coming to you from BBC World News. We've got the sports still to come, and Mimi has some news from the world of tennis as Francis Tiafoe is knocked out of the Australian Open by Rafa Nadal. Welcome back. I'm Lucressa Burek. You're watching Focus on Africa, our top stories. And after a week of deadly turmoil in Zimbabwe, the opposition has demanded an end to the violence it says has been perpetrated by the security forces in response to fuel price protests. And 1 week on, survivors of Nairobi's terror attack returned to the scene of the tragedy that rocked the nation, as a memorial service is also held to pay tribute to some of the victims. OK, we're going to return to our top story now and events taking place in Zimbabwe. President Mnangagwa has pulled out of visiting the World Economic Forum in Davos in Switzerland. He had to return home to deal with the protests in his own country. But his finance minister, Mthuli Ncube, is there. And our reporter, Sally Bundock, caught up with him and asked him for his reaction to the violent crackdown against opponents of his government.
We're saying that reforms are painful. We have to work together and make sure that we were consistent. It is painful for everyone. And Mnangagwa was very clear this morning in his statement that, look, violence on both sides, it cannot be tolerated. It is not part of our society. It should really cease and we should make sure that we get into a dialogue mode, work together, we'll come out together. So the reaction of any government is to make sure that there is law and order. And the president has clearly said that, look, if there was acts of violence on both sides, that is not welcome in the way that he sees a vision for Zimbabwe. If you look at the protests, the threat to get into a protest mode started well before the fuel increases were announced. Absolutely, these were planned well before. Clearly, something was afoot, and I must admit that it was purely out of character to see Zimbabweans behaving in this way.
That was Zimbabwe's finance minister speaking to us earlier from Davos in Switzerland. Now, I want to show you something. Take a look at that. That is the magical spectacle, of course, of the famous African sunset. Now, this is a scene from the Sahel, also known as the gateway into the Sahara Desert, and also one of the areas worst affected by global warming, and that's worldwide I'm talking about. Well, the International Committee of the Red Cross has sounded new warnings about the impact climate change is having here. Now, they believe that shrinking resources combined with Islamic extremism and tribal conflict is creating an explosive combination. Well, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, reports now from the town of Mnangagwa to see how climate change is impacting on daily life.
The Sahel, locked in a long war to hold back the desert. It's losing. And now a new enemy, climate change, threatening the world's most vulnerable lands. Mali fights on many fronts. UN forces are on the ground here, the world's most dangerous peacekeeping mission, often under attack by extremist groups, including Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. 63-year-old farmer Bouya Al-Baraka has seen it all. A country of extremes now lurches from drought to floods. Last summer, there was more rain than anyone can remember. All his crops were washed away, his home flooded with water, a mud home full of cracks after an explosion nearby. So what is the biggest enemy now? Is it the conflict or the climate?
The conflict and the climate. Everything is a problem here. Mali has all the problems. And some families don't even have anything to eat.
And for him, 10 children to feed. Life lived on the very edge. Every generation more fragile than the last. These boys forced to join armed groups. Now this center provides a refuge.
My family fled the violence. I stayed behind to take care of our animals, but there was no rain then, nothing for them to eat. The animals died, one after the other. I had no choice but to join a group with guns.
The desert has always dominated life here. People have learned to live with that. But the power of climate change is changing everything and making it much worse. Poverty, extremism, and the conflicts over land and water people need just to survive. Today, a call for help from the desert in Mali. Tuareg musicians belt out a big welcome to a visiting delegation. The president of the ICRC, here to focus on this fight.
It hasn't been on our radar screen. Our natural genetics is that we look at arms, at armed actors, at conflict, maybe at underdevelopment, but we didn't look at too much at the natural environment. Now we see that climate change, changing rain patterns, changing livelihoods of people is leading to conflicts amongst communities.
So much has been lost. This is the Grand Mosque of Timbuktu, the fabled city in the sand. Centuries ago, a city of gold, a cultural capital. 7 years ago, Islamist fighters smashed many of its shrines. And this magnificent mud mosque is still imperiled.
This mosque was built in an arid area. It wasn't built to drain so much water. Now there is more and more rain and wind. They threaten this site. There is so much to do.
Almost all Malians live off this land, their livestock too. As temperatures rise, resources shrink and conflict grows as time runs out in this largely forgotten corner of our world. Lise Doucette, BBC News, Northern Mali.
Well, do stay with us here on Focus on Africa, because that's fantastic Hollywood news for you concerning the Oscars. Before all that, though, Mimi, you've got the sport.
I do
They're
indeed.
getting hot to trot.
Now, it's a move that came as a surprise to many, but former Ghana international Kevin Prince Boateng was officially presented earlier today as the newest member of the Barcelona team. The 31-year-old has joined on loan from Italian side Sassuolo until the end of the season. But there is an option for Barca to make it a permanent deal. Boateng is looking forward to what's ahead.
No, I think for every kid who starts to play football is a big dream to play in a club like Barcelona. So for every football player, and especially for me, it's a big dream coming true.
A dream move, he says, a big dream come true. So it's no surprise that he's got that big smile on his face. Now, the last time Kevin Prince Boateng played for Ghana was at the 2014 World Cup when he was asked to leave the squad. We've been speaking to football fans in Accra, Ghana, about whether they would like to see him return to the national team after his big move to Barcelona.
It depends on the management of Ghana Black Stars team. If they come together and they negotiate how better things will be and they want him back, definitely he will come back because he loves to play to Ghana.
He's still our man. He's a Ghanaian. So after everything is set down well with the GFA, I believe that it will be good he comes back.
If it had been my wish, I would have wished he's being called back to a Black Star because he's equally good too. To help Ghana or even win something for Ghana one day. He's equally good. He's not finished. He's still playing. 31 years, but still, he's still skillful and doing something great in football. That's why Barcelona is able to win sign because they've realized that he's very good. He's a good player.
To football transfers, former Senegal and Chelsea striker Dembaba heads back to play in Turkey, but this time with league leaders Istanbul Başakşehir. He joins the club on loan until the end of the season from Chinese side Shanghai Shenhua. Also today was confirmed that South Africa midfielder Leandro Smeda has signed for Swedish side Vitesse after impressing at the 2018 Women's Africa Cup of Nations. And staying with African football transfers, former Nigeria Under-17 World Cup winner Chidiebere Nwakali has signed for his 8th club in 4 years. The 22-year-old has joined Swedish club Kalmar FF on a 3-year deal as a free agent. Elsewhere on Monday, DR Congo's Yannick Bolasie has returned to Everton after the winger chose to cut short his loan at Aston Villa. And finally, in tennis, American Frances Tiafoe, whose parents are from Sierra Leone, has been knocked out of the Australian Open by Rafael Nadal. The Spaniard beat him in 3 straight sets. Tiafoe celebrated his 21st birthday with the biggest win of his career by reaching his maiden Grand Slam quarterfinal on Sunday. But Nadal proved too much for him, breaking each of his first service games of the set. And that's all the sport, Luquesa.
Black Panther, what do you think about it?
Absolutely.
Would you watch it again?
I certainly would.
Do you know what? I think more people are going to return to the cinema or buy it or watch it because I've got some great news from Hollywood, Mimi.
Can't wait.
Yeah, Black Panther has made history. It is officially the first superhero movie ever to be nominated for the Best Pictures at the Oscars. Oh, look at those scenes. I'm going back to the cinema. Now, the nominations for the 91st Academy Awards were announced today, and Black Panther scored a whopping 7 nominations, including original score and costume design. You'll remember that the film dominated the box office in 2018. It brought in a whopping $1.3 billion worldwide, and I'm sure that figure is going to rise or continue to rise through 2019. That is it from the programme here, from the team here on Focus on Africa. If you'd like to share a story or a comment, do get in touch on Twitter. You can find me. I'm at Luquesa Burak. Until tomorrow, cheerio.